AI is here to stay, and if you want to keep up in the creative writing world, you need to know how to use it. Thankfully, there are already a lot of tools that make the AI writing process so much easier, and so in this video, we're going to go through all of those. Now, I've divided these tools into two distinct categories. We have the specialized tools that are specifically geared to write long-form fiction or nonfiction, and then we have the chatbots, which are kind of a catch-all for everything else. And generally speaking, I recommend that authors have one in each category. So one of the specialized tools and one of the chatbots to be a catch-all for any other thing that doesn't quite fall into the realm of fiction writing specifically, but might just be something you need. Maybe you need to brainstorm something, maybe you need to do a book description, something that isn't necessarily as easy to do in the specialized tools because they're not designed for it. But the specialized tools are also really helpful because they dramatically simplify the fiction writing process. And so in this video, we're going to go through both of those categories, starting with the chatbots, and then we'll get into the specialized tools later. So let's start with the chatbots. The chatbot can basically all be used for fiction, although they are more versatile than that. And most of them specialize in one particular family of models. So you have the Claude models, the GPT models, the Llama models, etc. Now, this video is not going to go in depth on which models are better, because number one, they're all pretty good now. And number two, I'm actually going to do a separate video comparing all of the different large language models to each other. Instead, in this video, we're going to be focusing on the individual features of each chatbot. So the first one is, of course, the most obvious one that everyone knows, and that is ChatGPT. ChatGPT, I think, has the distinction of not only being first, but I think it has the most features as a chatbot. Now, if you go with this chatbot, I do recommend the $20 subscription. There is a $200 subscription as well, but that's really only for people and businesses that are really heavily into AI and need that unlimited flexibility that they get with that plan. For most authors, it's going to be wildly unnecessary. ChatGPT is the chatbot that houses the GPT models from OpenAI. So if you go up here at the top, you can see that you've got your different models right here. It doesn't have all of the models that GPT has ever produced, but it does have the ones you're most likely to need, including GPT-4o. This is the most recent one with the creative writing update, which is one I recommend in most cases. But they also have o1, which is a highly useful tool as well for any kind of advanced reasoning that you might need. And it's so far the best model that we have for editing. You also have a couple of older models here as well. Additionally, you can create a project here. So if you have a project here that we can just say a writing fiction project, and you open up this project. Here you can add specific instructions for this particular project, and you can also add files. So say world building files, character profile details and stuff. That can all go here, and then you can just chat in this project and it will have all of that stuff aware in its context about how that works. And then you can also create GPTs. Now, GPTs are actually very similar to projects, but they can be shared with other people and they do very specific things. So to do that, you come here to create a GPT and put in the name, the description of the GPT, the instructions on what it should do. This is very similar to those instructions that you saw in the projects section. And then you can add any particular knowledge here. So it's very similar. I wouldn't actually be surprised if they merge these two features at some point in the future. But there is a nice thing about a GPT is that you can share it and use other GPTs that other people have created. That's a very useful tool. You can also make sure it has access to all of these things: web search, DALL-E, image generation, code interpreter, and data analysis, etc. Speaking of DALL-E, DALL-E is another image generating tool that you have access to inside of ChatGPT. It's probably not my favorite. In fact, I'd say it's a little bit behind, but I'm sure we're going to get an updated model pretty soon. But you have access to that if you need some image generation right in the chat. Not all of the chatbots have image generation involved. Additionally, like most of these chatbots, you'll have the ability to attach files, so you can add images, PDFs, etc. that you want it to look at. You can also have it search the web, which is a useful feature. The search GPT functions are very useful. And in fact, I don't use this particular tool, but I use another tool called Perplexity, which is great for research and definitely one I recommend. Additionally, one of my favorite tools in ChatGPT is the advanced voice mode. This is my go-to place to just have back and forth brainstorming conversations, to kind of just think through the stories that I'm developing and stuff like that. That's one of my favorite features. Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of advanced voice mode time. If you are just on the $20 plan, you get an unlimited, I believe it's unlimited amount if you're on the $200 plan, but unfortunately you only get like 15 minutes of spoken voice if you're on the $20 plan, which can run out quickly if you use it a lot. Last but not least, I want to mention that ChatGPT does have the ability to customize instructions that are kind of universally seen across all of the different chats. So if you want it to know certain details about yourself or your projects or whatever it is, you can have it to know that information at all times, essentially, by including that here in the customized GPT section. But yeah, that's pretty much all of the major features inside of ChatGPT. So let's move on to the next one, which is Gemini. Now, Gemini comes from Google and Alphabet, basically, and it is another one of the top chatbots out there. I would give it points for being the best one with the best ecosystem. Now, the models have been known to be really good for things like brainstorming and things like that, but all in all, it can do all of the same things that ChatGPT or Claude or any of the others can do. You can create what they call a gem, which has the same features essentially as the projects or the GPTs, where you just give it information about your project and then it'll understand those things intuitively. You have access to a bunch of different models here, including 1.5 Pro and so forth. And in fact, if you have Gemini Advanced, which again is $20 for the monthly tier, a lot of these are going to be $20, integrates with everything. In fact, you probably, even if you don't have the advanced version, you might see it in Google Docs and other things where it's just seamlessly integrated into those tools that Google has. You can have it connect to YouTube Music. I'm actually going to turn that one on. Google Maps, Google Flights, if you wanted to help you book flights, which I don't know if you really would want to do that, but you could do that, as well as all of your Google Workspace. So it's definitely got the advantage when it comes to interface integration. Additionally, Gemini has an option here called Deep Research, which I actually find to be really, really useful. It's similar to ChatGPT's O1 model, which does reasoning, except in this case, Google will actually go out and research the web heavily and then take all of that information into account to give you a definitive answer. And it's a really great thing if you want some like definitive answers to questions and research, if you're trying to learn something that you can get. I was using it recently to troubleshoot some issues I was having with some games crashing, and it did a massive amount of research and then created the sort of summarized report on it. And it was actually really helpful. So that's one of the advantages of Gemini. One of the other things I really like about Gemini is when you sign up for the $20 a month tier, you automatically with that get 2 terabytes of storage in Google's cloud. As a business owner, I would almost pay that anyway. Even without Gemini, I would want that Google Cloud storage. And so if you are someone that uses Google Cloud heavily, Gemini might be one for you. So that's Gemini. Let's move on to Claude. Now, Claude is another one. It's actually my personal favorite chatbot. I would give it points for being the best minimalist chatbot out there. You can see the design here is really simple. There's not much to it, but the downside of this is it doesn't have as many features as ChatGPT or Gemini, but it does have a couple of things that I like. First of all, the models are some of my favorites. I know I said I wouldn't compare the models in this video, but they are, in general, the Claude family of models are one of my favorites. And I also just like the simplicity of this chatbot. One of the reasons why I suggest having a chatbot as opposed to going directly through an API is simply simplicity. It's just easier to pull up a chatbot and just say a few words and it goes off and does its thing. If I'm accessing these models through an API like OpenAI's Playground, there's a little bit more fine-tuned control and things that you can have there. Sometimes it's a better option that doesn't have all of the features that you get from the chatbots, but usually you get more control, you get a little bit more technical hands-on approach in the APIs. But when you come to the actual chatbot, sometimes it's just easier. And that's why I recommend it, especially because if you are an author that doesn't have a lot of tech savviness, just going with the chatbot is often the best way to go. And so Claude is one of those that's particularly simple, and I like it because of that. You can select your models here when you're going through your chat. You can also, and this is something that not all of the others do, you can select whether you want concise answers, explanatory, formal, action prose. Oh no, wait, that's one that I created myself. Never mind. So you can actually create styles that are designed to more like how you want to see it go. So you can have specific styles set up. It's a little bit like having the custom instructions that I showed you with ChatGPT, but you can have multiple of them and just switch through them here. Generally, I leave this on concise unless I'm doing something like writing prose and I want that available. So you can do that here. You can also access projects in Claude. In fact, Claude did the projects thing first, and here here are some of my projects that I have here. And these work exactly like the ones I showed you in ChatGPT, except ChatGPT sort of copied what Claude was doing because Claude had this first. So you click on any of these projects and then you can chat within this project. You've got project knowledge here. You can add files, etc. And it does a really good job. And it's my favorite way to interact with the AI through a chatbot is through a project like this, and particularly in Claude projects because it's nice and simple. But unfortunately, that is kind of it for the major features that Claude offers. You can attach files. It does integrate with Google Drive, so you can pull in a Google Doc if you want to. You can also capture screenshots, so you can ask questions about things that you're seeing on your screen. But in general, it doesn't do things like generate images or anything like that some of the others do. So it is a simple one, but it is still my favorite, mostly because of the models in it, but also because of the minimalist aspect to it. I just find it really simple and easy to use. So it's often the one that I just sort of default to if I just need a quick answer for something. All right, those are the three biggest ones that you're probably familiar with, but I want to talk about some others that you might not have heard of. And the first one here is Mistal's chat. Now, Mistal is one of those models and companies that is a little overlooked, in my opinion. First of all, the models are pretty good, and they might not be quite at the same level as OpenAI or Claude, but they will allow for some not safe for work content if you write that sort of content. And the chat feature is a little bit underrated, in my opinion, because first of all, it's free. You can use this chat for free, and it has access to some of the things that you would get in ChatGPT or the others like Canvas. It does web search. It also does image generation, which the images are actually not too bad. If I select that and say, give me an image of a nerdy novelist. And here we have a nerdy novelist, of course, because he's got the tousled hair and the glasses on. But you can see the quality of the image generation here is pretty good. I think it might be using Flux or one of those others open source ones, and it's actually decent. And I would say this is even better than what I could get out of DALL-E in ChatGPT. So that's really great. Now, this is a pretty simple interface, and there aren't a few features that you would expect to find elsewhere. There's no advanced voice mode. There's no projects feature. So it's just a simple chat, but it is free. The models are decent. It can do not safe for work stuff. And so it's an all around good chat tool. I think most people, like many people, are overlooking it. I think more people should take it seriously. And speaking of free, there's one other free chatbot that I should highlight, and that's Meta. Now, Meta has their own chatbot, and it also does a lot of things. It's very similar to the Mistal interface. There's no projects or anything like that. But because this is coming from Meta, there are a lot of things involved that can make it really appropriate for certain use cases. For instance, I think it's really good for social media content and things like that, which makes sense, right? But this is using Meta's Llama models, and it also has image generation. So for instance, let's just say, give me an image of a nerdy novelist. Let's see what it gives us. It's given us 4 different options instead of 1 like Mistal did. Okay, gave us very similar images, not quite as high quality, I'd say. Let's go with this one. One of the things you can do that I really like is you can actually select this icon right here and say animate it. Is all it does is it just animates it in just a short little, almost like a GIF type thing, where it just gives it a little bit of motion, and it actually is pretty decent. It's only a couple of seconds, but as you can see here, it's giving me a little animation of the image, and it's not a bad animation too. So I think this is actually pretty good, and I really like stuff like this. It could be absolutely wonderful for social media content and stuff like that. So I definitely still recommend you take Meta AI seriously. Now, when it comes to writing and things like that, I don't use it too much for fiction, but it can have a lot of other use cases that should definitely be considered. And it also doesn't have any of the projects or many of the other features that you get in the other chatbots, but it does have the ability to attach files and generate images and other things like that. So it's a useful tool. All right. Those are all of the chatbots that are specifically around one particular ecosystem of models. I want to now go to 2 other options that you should know about. One is very important, and that kind of use multiple different models. The first one is Poe. Now, Poe is a $20 subscription, just like any of these chatbots that I've talked to so far, other than Mistal and Meta, which are free. But the nice thing about Poe is that it actually can access any of the models that you want. Pretty much all of the ones that you would most likely use, you can access in here. And you can not only access those, but you can access image generating models as well, including ideogram, including a stable diffusion and Flux, and even some video generating models in there as well. Now, here's the caveat. You might ask like, oh, well, then why isn't everybody using this one? Because it sounds like the best one because it gives you the most flexibility. The problem with Poe is that from all the research I've done, they really limit the responses and the input that you're allowed to do. So even though a model is capable of handling really large prompts of like tens of thousands of words, Poe will not allow you to do that kind of prompting because it is trying to save cost. You know, it can only do so much when it's offering you $20 a month to have all of these things. So you're limited in what you can do. And for that reason, I wouldn't use it for any kind of long form fiction writing. It's just not really designed for that sort of use case because you're generating lots of text, you're inputting a lot of text. It's just clunky for that sort of use case. However, if you are someone that isn't planning on using AI too heavily in any particular area, you just want the capability to access multiple options when and if you need them, then Poe is a really, really good option because it gives you quite a bit of access to a lot of different models and AI video and images and audio all within one place. And it's really useful for that kind of use case. So if you're not going to be pushing these models too heavily, you're just going to be, asking questions now and then, maybe trying to get different opinions from different models, then Poe might be a good one to go with. Now, another one that is very similar to Poe, but is more pay as you go rather than a $20 subscription fee is Open Router. Now, Open Router is definitely one you're going to want to get anyway. And the reason for this is because we're going to use it to plug into some of the specialist tools I'll talk about later. But Open Router is also very flexible in the sense that it has access to pretty much all the models that you could possibly want. And I actually use it as a chatbot sometimes, especially if I want to compare responses between two different models. Here inside of the chat interface, I can come over here and say add a model. And as you can see, we've got tons and tons and tons of different models available to us, and we can use any of them. And this is even more models for each ecosystem. So I can go back much older versions of Claude or GPT that I can't do inside of ChatGPT or Claude Pro. Additionally, you can add files here if you need to, and you can create a new room here, which acts very similarly to how you would use a project, because you can come here to any of these models. Let's just say we're going to try DeepSeek. And from here, you can give it a specific system prompt. So this is similar to the custom instructions. Open Router is essentially a advanced API. And remember, I said APIs are not as simple as the chatbots, and that's true. But I need to make sure I talk about Open Router because we're going to use it later on. But you can put system prompts in here to add those custom instructions for each thing. And you also get quite a bit more flexibility with this model where you can actually adjust like what's the temperature of the model and things like that. So if that's the kind of thing that's important to you, then you have access to all of those things that you can experiment with. So it is a more advanced product, and it's not as simple as the other chatbots, but it is something that you're going to want to know. So I've found myself using Open Router just inside of Open Router, not even connected to the other tools that we're going to talk about quite frequently, because it allows me to access all of those models and have that flexibility. And it's pay as you go. And generally speaking, I know pay as you go sounds a little bit hesitant to people because they're like, well, don't I get unlimited chats if I'm using this $20 a month subscription? And the answer is no, you get throttled in those $20 subscriptions. There's only so much you can do. They do not let you chat indefinitely. And in fact, you would probably get more chats and more responses out of Open Router for $20 than you would in a month using Claude or ChatGPT or any of those others. That's because for most models, the price of creating a book inside of Open Router is really simple and really inexpensive. So I'll give you an example. So let's look at the GPT model, the most advanced GPT model here. This is another thing that you can do in Open Router that's very nice, is you can see all of this information about every model. The output is $10 per million tokens of output, which means that translates to approximately 750,000 words. So unless you're generating twice that, which would be 1.5 million words in a month, you're not going to be spending more than $20. So that's just to put in perspective that sometimes paying as you go is actually better, because you're only going to pay for the words that you actually use, and it's really not a whole lot of money. All right, those are all the chatbots that I wanted to cover. And if you want a specific recommendation, it's really going to depend on you. But my top recommendation would be to pick one of the big three. That's ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. Any one of them are good. Again, my personal favorite is Claude, but I could definitely see how ChatGPT or Gemini might be a better option. And then you, of course, have Mistal and Llama as free options if you want to check those out as well. Or Poe if you're one of those people that don't plan on using AI that much, but you want access to as many options as possible. Poe is a good option there. And then Open Router is just something I mentioned because we're going to need it going forward. So now let's talk about the specialist tools. There's 3 of them. And yes, I really only recommend one of these 3 if you're writing fiction, which is nice because that narrows down the options a little bit. There really isn't another option out there that comes close to be able to do what these 3 do. Or if they do, they're just poor clones of these 3. So let's talk about them. The first one is Novel Crafter. Now, Novel Crafter is my personal favorite. However, if you are a beginning author, it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around. It's a little bit more tech heavy. There's a learning curve, and it's kind of the Adobe Photoshop of this batch that we're about to talk about, but it is super powerful. So when I'm in Novel Crafter, you have a bunch of options here. You can see plan, you can write, you have a chat feature, which is similar to having its own chatbot. So theoretically, you could have all of your words here just right inside of the chatbot rather than using a different chat instead. You're still paying for those words as you go. So I generally recommend having one of each. There's just a simplicity to a chatbot that you don't get with this version of the chat, but it's useful to have because you can pull in information from your book. Now, one of the things I like about Novel Crafter is they have this thing called the Codex, and the Codex allows you to put information about different characters and things like that. And then when you go to write the book, you can see it's sort of highlighted here. That means it is pulling information about that character into the prompt so that when it is writing this chunk of the scene, it automatically knows information about that character so it can write them appropriately. And this is the greatest thing about Novel Crafter, is that it makes it so easy to pull in all of this information into its prompts so that the AI knows what to write next. If you're using a chatbot to write long form fiction, you have to manually copy and paste all of your character information and all of that into every single prompt to do it well. Whereas Novel Crafter will simplify the process and just automatically pull everything in. Additionally, you can access multiple models inside of Novel Crafter. So if I went here to generate prose and selected a prompt here, you can see I have access to a bunch of different models here that I can choose from. And that is because Novel Crafter is one of those tools that is connected to Open Router. You have to start with a connection to Open Router in order to get the large language models to generate inside of Novel Crafter. You can think of the large language models that are supplied by Open Router as the electricity, and Novel Crafter is kind of the appliance that runs on the electricity, if that makes sense. So not only can you pull in characters, you can put it in locations, and there's just a lot that we could talk about Novel Crafter, but suffice it to say, I believe it is the best tool here in terms of harnessing the power of AI in multiple ways. And you don't even need to use it for fiction necessarily. It can also be used for nonfiction because it's just best for long form writing in general. It's also used pretty heavily by people who are into like adventure tabletop gaming and stuff like that, because you can put all of the information about your world and your characters, including their, data sheets and everything like that, into the codex. And then it automatically knows all of those things as you're going through and writing some text here. So you can have it, write the next part of your campaign or something like that, knowing all of that information. And so it's just a really good tool to sort of organize all of the information that you have about your world and your story and pulling that all together. And I find that the workflow inside of Novel Crafter is the most realistic workflow of all of them for most authors who are doing this. Let's talk about the price of Novel Crafter. The one I generally recommend is the Artisan tier. This gives you access to all of the features basically, and including the chat features. If you're not as keen on the chat features inside of Novel Crafter, you can absolutely go with the hobbyist one here. And this may actually be better if you have a separate chatbot subscription. Then you might not need the chat features inside of Novel Crafter, so you can just go with the hobbyist tier here. Also keep in mind that this does not cover the amount of AI words that you're going to generate, because remember, those are coming through Open Router and being channeled through Novel Crafter. But as I kind of informed you already, it takes quite a bit of writing to actually spend a whole lot of money inside of Open Router. You have to, $10 using GPT-4o's, one of their flagship models, right, will get you 750,000 words. And so it's very unlikely that on a given month, you're going to be spending more than the $20 that you would on the chatbots. Even if you're paying for the Artisan or the hobbyist tier here on top of that, it's very unlikely you're going to be spending more than $20 a month. But I would probably, if you're using Novel Crafter heavily, let's say you're on the $14 a month plan, if you're using Novel Crafter heavily and using up a lot of words through Open Router, you're likely to be spending probably somewhere between $20 and $30. That's only if you're using it heavily though. Now that leads me to the second of the three, which is called Sudo Write. Now Sudo Write, it's the one that's been around for the longest. It was the big dog in town, and now maybe not as much of a favorite for me. However, there is one redeeming quality that I'll get to in a second, but it has very similar features to Novel Crafter. You can come here to this chapter, and if you want to continue writing here, you just come here and say write, and then you write what you want it to continue writing at this stage. You also have the ability to add in all of the information about your world, including brain dump, genre, the style, the synopsis. The characters are all inputted here, very similar to the codex in Novel Crafter. You can also put your outline in here, also something you can do in Novel Crafter. So it's very similar in a lot of ways. I do think that Sudo Write tries to be a simpler option, which is great for authors who are not tech savvy and who want something that's a little bit simpler and easier to do. That does come with some drawbacks. For instance, you cannot access all of the models that you can inside of OpenRouter or Novel Crafter via OpenRouter, just because it just doesn't have that option, which means sometimes if there's a newer model out, you have to wait for Sudo Write to actually go through and determine whether or not that model should be included inside of Sudo Write, and then you have to wait for them to include it, and it's a whole hassle. And if you want to just start writing with it, then you can only use Novel Crafter for something like that, or the next one that I'll talk about, which also connects to OpenRouter. So there's some drawbacks there. And also the other thing I don't like about Sudo Write is its pricing structure. It's the most expensive of the bunch and includes the AI words in that subscription, meaning you're not paying as you go like you would with Novel Crafter being hooked up to OpenRouter. Now, Sudo Write does have one major redeeming quality that I want to talk about here. Now, as I'm recording this feature is in beta, but I believe it's going to be opened up to open beta very soon, so you may see this already by the time I talk about it. But Sudo Write has their own model that is specifically designed for writing fiction, and this is by far the biggest advantage I've ever seen them come up with, because in terms of their pricing structure and everything, it's not my favorite, and even their interface is not really my favorite. I find Novel Crafter to be a much better workflow for myself. But that said, the model that Sudo Write has is fantastic. I'll just show you a little bit of what that looks like. I can just come here, say guided write, and it's currently designed right now, so it's using their custom model. Let's say Mina decides that she is actually Cinderella and tells Jonathan about it. And then this is going to write 250 words approximately. So it comes over here, writes the words out here. So I've given it kind of a ridiculous prompt, right? And if I were using any of the other AI models, it would be kind of abrupt and not great. It actually hasn't gotten to the Cinderella bit yet. And sometimes it does that because it knows that there needs to be some transition to get to something so abrupt. And so, we have Mina, he said softly, "Were you successful?" She thought of the older vampire's cold blue eyes after taunting words. "No," she admitted, "but I have learned something important." She paused, drawing in a breath she did not need. "We are out of our depth." Arthur stood and adjusted his waistcoat. "We have faced worse, Mina. Remember that we had Van Helsing then," she interrupted more sharply than she intended. "And now we're alone." A heavy silence settled over the room. They all knew it was true. Without Van Helsing's guidance, they were navigating blind. So I found that this model is by far the best thing that I've seen when it comes to writing with AI. It sounds the most natural. It understands the logic of a scene much, much better than any of the AI models out there. And it's also pretty good at its prose. It's not perfect, but it's going to get you more like 80% of the way there rather than the 50% of the way there that you might get with the other chat models. And so I think this is Sudo Write's biggest advantage. And if I had to recommend how to use Sudo Write, I would recommend using a different tool for most of the work you're going to do. But then when it comes to actually writing prose, if you want to use AI for writing prose, that's another caveat there. You might not want to use AI for the actual prose writing. I would only use Sudo Write for writing the prose because it's really good at that. But then I would use some other tool for everything else, for developing the characters and managing everything, all of that. All right, that brings me to the third and last specialist tool, and that is Raptor Write. Now, Raptor Write, again, kind of similar to Novel Crafter, but much simpler. And it has the added benefit that it is free, other than the AI words that you're going to generate. So notice down here in the corner, it says OpenRouter API key. This is where you put in your API key that you get inside of OpenRouter, and it automatically connects OpenRouter to Raptor Write, just the same way as you would in Novel Crafter. What that means is that any words you generate here in Raptor Write, you'll still have to pay for those through OpenRouter, but once again, you're not going to be paying a whole lot of money depending on the model you're using. And so that's not really something to worry about. And unlike Novel Crafter, Raptor Write is free. So that $8 a month or the $14 a month that you would be paying on top of your words in OpenRouter, if you were using Novel Crafter, you don't have to pay those if you're using Raptor Write. But Raptor Write is a lot simpler. It's not capable of doing everything that you can do inside of Novel Crafter or Sudo Write, but it is pretty good, especially if you're just starting out. And Raptor Write comes from the Future Fiction Academy, which is an education platform. And so you will actually get a free course when you sign up for Raptor Write that will walk you through how to use AI. And it's a fantastic course. I definitely recommend checking it out if you want some beginner instruction on how to use AI. And then you can use Raptor Write as you are going through that instruction and figure out how to do all of that. So let me just show you a little bit of what Raptor Write can do. So the first thing is, now that I've done a more in-depth video on Raptor Write, but the first thing I want to highlight here is that you can have different folders. So you can create a folder here and say, like, this is going to be my characters. Okay. You add a folder. And then you can create, so this one's just called blank title. It's in there by default. You could say, okay, this is my character Jason. And then you can fill in information about the character Jason, or you can run the LLM, and the commands to do so are down here. So I can give it a command like this, and the window here works as both a chat interface and a place to put all your stuff. So it's kind of a combination of a lot of different things that we've seen so far. I can just select this and then run the LLM, hit submit, and it's giving me a full character profile of this character named Jason. And if I like that, I can confirm, and now I have all of this information. And then the next thing I could do, let's say I go out of this folder and I want to create a new folder that's the chapters. And then in here, we'll say this one is called chapter 1. I can actually go through these folders and determine which ones are actually used in the prompting and which ones are not. So if I want this one turned on, I can come in here and say, okay, this one is toggled on. That means the chat is going to remember it when we get to writing the prose. So now if I go to chapters, I can say, give me the opening of a chapter with 500 words describing Jason's horrible day. And then all I have to do is select that and run the LLM. And here it is going ahead and writing it. So it works very similar to Novel Crafter, but honestly, it's a little bit simpler. If you don't know what you're doing, if you haven't gone through the free course that Future Fiction Academy provides you, you might be a little lost at first, but once you figure it out, it's very simple. It's very easy to do. And again, I'm not going to go in depth of all of these tools. I'm just going to give you my primary recommendations, but Raptor Write is definitely a good one, especially because it's free. Now, there are some capabilities that it doesn't really have. In fact, there are some things that I use Novel Crafter for that Novel Crafter just makes a lot easier than Raptor Write. I'll give you one example. So for instance, I can select large chunks of text here, and I have built-in prompts that do certain things. And sometimes there are cases where I just want to select massive amounts of text at once, run a prompt on it, it spits out the output, then I select the next massive chunk of text, run the same prompt, and that's something that's not as easy to do just from a workflow standpoint in Raptor Write, but Novel Crafter makes it really easy. It's also something that is not really easy to do inside of Sudo Write. This is why Novel Crafter is one of my favorites, because it is very versatile. It can do lots of cool stuff and makes the whole facilitation of it, the workflow process, a lot easier. That's why it's my favorite. So what's the bottom line? What is my recommendation for all of these tools? Well, as I mentioned, I usually recommend one chatbot and one specialist tool. Of the chatbots, I'd pick one of the big three. It doesn't really matter too much which one, it just whichever works better for you. With the specialist tools, I would go with either Raptor Write or Novel Crafter. Again, Novel Crafter is my favorite, but it is more complex. If you are a techie person, it might not be best for you. It also costs a little bit more. So you might want to go with Raptor Write in that case. And then if you're actually using AI to write the first draft of your book, then I would take a look at Sudo Write, specifically for their fine-tuned Muse model, which can be used specifically to write that first draft. I think it is the best, but I would not use Sudo Write for anything else other than writing that first draft. I would instead use one of the other two for all of my writing needs, except for that first draft process. And that's my top recommendation. Now, if you are unfamiliar with how to use AI and all of the different ways that AI can help you, because AI can do so much more than just writing the prose of a book. And many authors think that's what we're using it for, but really AI can help you at any step of the process. I did a whole video where I went through 75 different things that AI can do for you as a writer, besides just writing the actual prose. So go check that video out, and I will see you in the next one.